The underbelly of dressage saddle design, fashion and function. Welcome to this series on saddle design. I'm Ian Bidstrup, a spinal rehabilitation veterinarian who for 20 years was the lead presenter, instructor and manual editor for the accredited saddle fitters of Australasia. Enjoy. In part 2 we took a deep dive view of the framework of the saddle tree. In part 3 we do the same, this time with the cushion between the framework of the saddle and the horse, namely the panels of the saddle. Let's look at the panels now. Bit of a historical perspective for a start. This is a traditional Spanish saddle that has a huge panel under it for really covering large distances and keeping the horse's back comfortable. And this is a traditional Portuguese one, so quite different from our modern saddles today. This one's one of our family heirloom saddles that are from early in the 20th century, and there's quite a bit of support through the panel through here. Just ignore the fact that this has got a broken tree and it's come closer through the middle and it's deteriorating in many ways, seeing it's probably 125 years old, this saddle. This one here is a 1950s saddle, so it was used in the Royal Melbourne Show, and it's got quite a decent panel under it and quite a decent amount of support through the actual panel here. And you can see how the panel is actually angled down to give maximum support for the rider's weight. And the actual tree point under my thumb there is quite long. Compare that to the modern saddles of today, where we've got much less panel most often and much less support for the rider, even though people these days are usually heavier and have greater height than the ones in earlier times. We've got less support for the actual rider, so that has consequences. What sort of panel fill is that's another important variability, and it suits different situations. Most are filled with various sorts of wool flocks. They can be natural or synthetic. Each different sheep breed has wool and even within a breed can have wool that's got different sort of spring to it, and each different synthetic flock has got a different amount of spring to it, so they're not exactly the same medium. And if you're having your flocking adjusted in your saddle, make sure that the saddle is using the same flock as should be used in that saddle that was originally used in the saddle. Unless they're replacing the whole lot of it, they should be using the same sort of flock as was used originally. Wool of various sorts, whether it be synthetic or sheep wool, has a spring action of when it's getting compressed, and all of us are familiar with this with a Dacron type pillow with the amount of spring it has for a start. With repeated compression, the spring actually fatigues over time, and then it becomes dull and firm and a poorly forgiving or bouncing fill and cushioning fill. So things change over time. The saddle fitters and saddlers progressively add an outer layer of soft flock between the horse and the rider, renews the springiness of the flock as things compress down. If the saddle gets too heavily filled and with flock, then it usually becomes quite hard and uncomfortable for the horse. And in that case, and before that actually occurs, the flock should be completely removed and replaced. If you've got new flock that's quite a thick panel, then it's going to drop quite a lot where there is higher pressures. And there tends to be higher pressures over the wither of horses with more angulation, and the saddle tends to drop more readily through that area as it is. So be very wary with new saddles that you get the saddles adjusted early enough. A saddle that is adjusted for that horse right from the start should actually have fill added and pounded down and hardened through the front. If they've got a bit of, say, muscle atrophy through the wither, it's got to be done correctly. Otherwise, you're going to start riding and very soon you'll be actually falling forward, and then you'll lean back to compensate and your legs will go in the wrong direction. And this is going to create real difficulty for you, and you're going to think that the saddle is terrible when it's just the fact that it hasn't been kept balanced. And you've got to get your saddle fitter back more readily the more flock there is in that brand new saddle. The other thing that happens with flock is because we're doing this sort of action against the horse, there's a bit of a swirling action within the panel, and balls of flock actually get produced from that. They actually turn into little hard lumps, and these need to be actually taken out by your saddle fitter and replaced with new flock. The other thing is flock, particularly on ones that don't have a very flat wither, that have more angular wither, the flock from the bottom of the panel in the wither section will push upwards and will end up being thicker at the top and thinner at the bottom. And this is taking away pressure where we want to keep it on and adding pressure to the upper part of the panel where we actually want to keep it light, because it's often, as I talked about the spinalis thoracis muscle there, it's often a sensitive part. So we need to be aware that that is a bad change and needs to be addressed reasonably frequently. Foam overcomes a lot of those problems, and it's frequently utilised in saddles to provide a nice cushioning effect against the horse. When a horse has a good muscle coverage and maintains a relatively stable body weight and condition, these panels can function quite effectively, requiring a minimum of maintenance while enabling close contact between the rider and the horse. However, it's essential that the shape of the tree and the panels very closely align with the horse's back when it is in a good working frame. Not when it's just standing there in the stable yard, but when it's actually out there working and the muscles are filled up with blood and so forth, and the horse has lifted its back well. Typically, these panels, though, are very challenging to modify, making them unsuitable for horses that experience changes in muscle development and body condition throughout the year, or those that have areas of muscle wastage. Another type of fill is air, and there's two main uses of air panels, and that is wow saddlery and the bait saddlery. Each use two airbags on each side of the saddle, but the airbag type varies a great deal. The flare panels invented by WOW are ones that are inflated, and the inflation is changed according to getting the saddle well balanced under the rider. So it can be lifted at the front or the back, it can be lifted or dropped from side to side according to what is needed for the individual horse. It's done in a static situation, so it's not perfect. It needs to be assessed when the horse is, when actively ridden as well. If these are too firm, then it can be less comfortable for the horse's back. If they're too soft, there can be too much movement. The latest version of these involves a smaller airbag and more foam, so there's less instability being a possibility there. Care air panels. These consist of sealed, uniquely shaped bags with air and open cell foam within those bags. Each side has two overlapping bags, and these bags are designed to be relatively thin, ensuring a fairly close fit to the horse's back. Because all horses' backs aren't perfectly shaped to suit the tree of these saddles, the tree is actually changed in shape by using inserts within another part of the panel to change the shape of the tree to better match the horse's back. If the horse has lost muscle through the back or has very steep wither, these panels have a bit of difficulty in actually matching the back well without making the pressure on the actual care bags too tight. And when that happens, it makes them a very hard interface between the saddle and the horse. And in that case, they're not very comfortable for the horse. But in cases where we can keep it nice and matched, it works really nicely. There is limitation of panel function. And really the panel function is only as good as the framework or the saddle tree above it and how well that supports the panel. In areas like this, where there is a gusseted panel and there's actually no framework above it, the actual function of this part of the panel, for instance, relies on this being filled well. If it's lightly filled, then this is not going to function at all. But further to that, there are lots of situations where you can have a large panel, but it's not well supported by the actual saddle tree. Just to press that point a little bit further, this is an independent panel here with the tree point pocket, and the tree point's going to be under here. You can see that this bit here is just floating in mid-space. It's not supported by much in the way of either the tree or, and it's the same under here, or the stirrup bar. It's only supported by the flap under the rider's leg, and that is nowhere near the same support as been given by the tree point. So there's a lot of variability of support and not very good support through this section here. One manufacturer has got around the problems with panel support by actually putting a semi-rigid plate above his panels, and this actually effectively improves the support through this area here that would not be very well supported otherwise, and right through the actual saddle itself. Reportedly, this has allowed the manufacturer to produce saddles of equivalent comfort from a thinner panel, allowing closer contact between the horse and the rider, which is a very handy bonus. And even if you weren't after close contact, but you wanted to fill more panel to actually fill where there'd been atrophy, that sort of system can really help make the panel work so much better and support the rider so much better in itself. Now, if we look at another aspect of the saddle, look at the flaps, we've got a big preponderance of mono flap saddles these days with only one flap and an independent panel, one that's not stitched to that flap. So in this case, the panel is stitched to that flap, and in being stitched to the flap, it gives more rigidity and support for this part of the panel. Here we've got much poorer support, so we've got lovely big panels, but not very well support right through this area here. We've got good support here, great support over the tree point perhaps, but not much support through this part here other than the saddle flap. In part 4, we look more closely at the front third of the saddle. See you there.